So there you have it. Liam Smith in 4 rounds. It only took 4 rounds for Liam Smith to dispose of Chris Eubank Jr. I have to say, this fight did not go the way I expected to. Going into this fight, I was picking Eubank to win on points, and I thought the fight was actually going the way that I had initially expected for it to go early on in the fight. I felt the difference in the fight was going to be made in athleticism. Liam is the more technically and fundamentally sound fighter, but he's also slower, and he also really doesn't move his head. He's not necessarily the most busy in terms of his work rate from the outside, and I felt Eubank would have a little bit easier time being able to, stick and move from the outside, or just be able to pot shot him because, well, firstly, obviously, like I said, he has quicker feet, he's longer, and Liam Smith also, or at least what I'd seen from Eubank in previous fights early in his career, even up until now, fighting big punchers, he's generally showed a pretty good chin. I mean, against George Groves, he was taking big right hands throughout the whole night. I mean, he really should have been ruled down a couple of times in that fight, but George Groves, is a big punching 168-pounder. We all know what he was able to do to the likes of Karl Froch and whatnot. He was able to finish Fedor Chudanov off, and he's a guy who notoriously has an iron chin. We all know what he's capable of in terms of his power, and Chris Eubank was able to take him the distance. So I was not really expecting Liam Smith to be able to move up from 154 pounds and be able to take him out in the way he did. I have to say, I do feel happy for Liam Smith. Smith has definitely had quite a bit of an up and down career. He won his title against Apollo Johnson, the WBO belt. Definitely not the strongest of champions. He made his defense against Kilrain Kelly, the dude Munguia had his, was able to knock out last year, I believe in June. So, definitely not the most overwhelming title reign in terms of level of competition. He was able to secure a significant payday anyways against Canelo. He's lost a couple of fights since then. I believe he lost against Kurbanov in Russia, which was hotly contested. Arguably should have went his way, and he lost a pretty comprehensive decision to Jaime Munguia in his second challenge for a world title. But obviously, since then, though, he has picked up some pretty good wins domestically. He had 2 wins against Liam Williams, one of which was controversial. He had a win against Jesse Vargas stateside. I believe this was on the undercard of Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, I think it was. He was able to, I believe, stop Jesse Vargas late in the fight. Vargas is notoriously durable as well. He was also able to secure a stoppage over Anthony Fowler in Liverpool in a pretty big domestic clash, both men being from Liverpool, and Fowler obviously being a bit of sort of a hype job, kind of a guy as a prospect. Ended up losing to Scott Fitzgerald, and his career has basically gone downhill from there, and supposedly he's plotting to campaign at 160 pounds. Smith went on to have a bit of a disappointing performance to some extent against Hassan Marquinhos, who's a bit of a wild card and was able to take out Sam Eggington a number of years ago, but in that fight he suffered some type of an injury and ended up getting put down twice in the 4th round. Kind of quit. But Smith anyways moved on. He definitely didn't look his best in that fight in those early rounds. Was, getting outboxed a little bit. Marquinhos was landing some very nice pot shots. But heading into this fight, he was the underdog. He was moving up in weight against an ex-168-pounder who's displayed excellent conditioning, very good endurance, and himself has been able to clear out some good names domestically. The likes of Liam Williams, who he beat last year. He was set to fight Conor Benn in an absolute circus show, which now, based on the evidence that we've just acquired here, probably wouldn't have turned out well for him, especially considering the fact that he was handicapped horribly. But, thankfully it was finally revealed that Conor Benn had failed a drug test, despite the fact that the British Boxing Board of Control purposefully attempted to conceal that. So this fight gets made. Liam Smith, being the underdog in this fight, though the fundamentally better fighter, I thought would struggle with the range, and he was. But the first round, I'd say, kind of set the tone for what he was trying to do during the fight. He was actually trying to kind of fight Chris Eubank in his own sort of a counterpunching game. Eubank was definitely leaving a lot of openings. He was keeping both of his hands down. He was landing his jab well, but he was not active enough with it. He was not landing enough deterrence on Liam Williams in those early couple of rounds to keep him from being able to close the distance. So really his only mechanism for being able to stop and halt Williams' momentum was either if he was able to catch him in exchanges or to clinch. He wasn't resetting his feet a lot in time, so he was forced to oftentimes get his work smothered. The third round, he landed some very, very nice uppercuts. Was able to, I think, stun Liam Williams a bit down the stretch of the round. Had an excellent round. I thought Eubank had won the second and third rounds. The first one was a relatively close round that I gave to Smith. Even though I thought he got outlanded, I thought he landed the more telling sort of power shots. The second round was also pretty close, but I edged Eubank, and the third round was a very clear Eubank round. But the fourth round comes in. It appears to be more of the same, but one thing I noticed immediately with Smith is he was shifting his head slots. He was using a lot of pre-slips. He was, very active with his hands. He was forcing, Chris Eubank to back against the ropes in straight lines. He eventually got him in the corner. He landed a vicious uppercut, and Liam Smith's best shot, I think, is his left hook. He was able to land a right hand over the top. He followed up with a left hook flush on the chin, and it ended up putting Chris Eubank down. Really, the referee had every right to stop the fight then. He was completely out of sorts. I think the referee did make a deliberate attempt to try to continue the fight with the fact that Chris Eubank wasn't even making direct eye contact with him. And as opposed to both men being in a neutral corner, which would have been expected considering Eubank was near the ropes himself, and he wasn't even following the referee's instructions precisely enough. The referee really had every right to stop the fight then, but he let the fight continue. Eubank ended up piling it on Eubank. Smith ended up piling it on Eubank. Eubank was trying to clinch. He got put down again, but the referee at that point had seen enough, which was fair enough. Very, very good win for Liam Smith. Fuck's sake. This is the best win of Liam Smith's career as far as I'm concerned, because, if you take into account his previous wins, Anthony Fowler, he'd already kind of failed at that level. Really, you'd have to make someone like Chris Eubank a pretty significant favorite over someone like him. Eubank, while he hadn't, beaten a lot of great names in their prime or anything, or even proven himself to be quite world-class, he did have some okay names on his record, or at least decent enough, relatively convincing performances, even in defeat, that were at least able to display some of the areas of his game in which I do feel that he can pose certain physical threats, at least to top guys, because he is very well conditioned. He does have great reflexes, but he just lacks really any fundamental skill. And I think the fact that he is so caught in between styles, and the fact that he's been trying to fight like Roy Jones when really, in his full essence, when he's at his best, he's kind of a pressure fighter. He's a guy who throws a lot of punches, works his hands, and can fight pretty much at every range. He seemed to completely abandon that style and try to pot-shot guys at long range, but at the same time, he was starting to, instead of work upon and build upon and improve fundamentally in regards to within the confines of the style in which he works best, he's trying to execute basically what his childhood dream was, effectively, to fight like a mix between his father and Roy Jones, and it just didn't work out. Because he doesn't have the chin, he doesn't have the power, he doesn't have the skill, and yeah, he does, even though he's very disciplined inside of the gym, he works very hard, and as I stated before, he shows up in fights in fantastic condition. He's not disciplined in terms of how he fights, his tactics. He usually gets his tactics he usually never fails to execute his tactics very poorly. Just look at his jab, for example. He does have a very good jab, and when he used it in the early rounds and was keeping it active in around the second and third rounds, even early on in the first round, it was landing with regularity on Liam Smith. But then he just started to abandon it, waiting to land combinations with his chin up in the air, and he's just not a particularly high IQ fighter. That's just the reality. So Liam Smith, who's the better fundamental fighter and also the more accomplished fighter, albeit he might not have beaten quite the name, a name quite on Chris Eubank's level. He's just executed that today. And yeah, it looks like Chris Eubank's hopes of potentially winning a world title that is not the International Boxing Organization have likely dissipated. So, I have to say, I did enjoy the fight. The card overall was kind of up and down. I enjoyed the Echo Esserman versus, was it Chris Congo fight? I was happy with the result of the fight. I felt Esserman did enough down the stretch to wear down Chris Congo and make up for some of the disadvantages he had in skill at long range. He showed better endurance. He showed a much better ability on the inside and was able to grind him down, and I thought the judges did a good job in giving him the decision, despite the fact that, he did win a lot of those rounds ugly. I felt he did enough in enough of those rounds that even though he did look pretty poor in the early rounds, I thought his endurance managed to eke out a very close decision in his favor. Joseph Parker went the distance with cruiserweight Jack Massey. I expected it to go the distance, but I also felt that Joseph Parker, while he obviously wasn't spectacular in terms of the overall skill or poise he showed, I thought his punch resistance definitely is starting to dissipate a little bit. He does have a knack for having an iron chin, but I thought in this fight, Jack Massey was able to stun him a few times, and that's not something that you would typically hope out of someone like him, getting stunned by a cruiserweight like Jack Massey. Jack Massey can punch a bit. I do remember he iced Bilal Lagoon on Fight Zone, I believe, but still, Parker is someone who is known to take big shots from guys like Joshua and Dillian White and whatnot. He even took a hell of a lot of punishment against Joe Joyce, but it seems like that's the fight that's probably going to send him over the edge in terms of the mountaintop of his career. I think it's really only downhill from here because a lot of his style is athleticism predicated, and once that starts to dissipate, he's going to have to rely on more fundamental skills, which he seriously lacks, especially defensively. What else did we have on the card? The co-main event, Richard Riakporhe versus Krzysztof Glowacki. Riakporhe is a very basic fighter. 1-2, sort of works the back foot. Not super mobile anyways, but does like to fight near the ropes, near the perimeter, and lure opponents in range for his right hand, and he was able to do that successfully to Glowacki. He hurt him in the first round, or it was the first or second round he hurt him. And then he managed to catch Glowacki again. I thought the referee stopped it a bit prematurely, although, Glowacki is certainly someone who is far over the mountaintop in regards to his career. He had a tune-up last year, I believe, in April, but the fight before then he showed hardly any ambition and was thoroughly taken apart by Lawrence Okolie, who's someone you have to envision is probably a level above Richard Riakporhe. Okolie also has a better control of distance, and even despite the fact that Glowacki was able to close the distance and get in range, he was hardly really pulling the trigger. His timing looked off, and Riakporhe was just able to pick him off, and when he was able to pick him off, he was landing flush shots. So that ultimately was the difference maker in the fight. Fraser Clark fought another, another kebab stand owner. So there you go. But overall, I thought much of the card I did enjoy. I thought there were some interesting fights anyways, or at least interesting results. Joseph Parker's future is something to potentially watch for, and maybe he can fight certain prospects, or maybe be relegated to a gatekeeper, or maybe make some type of an attempt at a renaissance. I am definitely excited to maybe see the future of Liam Smith for sure. In terms of Chris Eubank, I'm not really sure where it goes from here, but Liam Smith, I look forward to seeing potentially if he can get some type of a world title shot. He might be able to secure a shot at Janibek. I mean, this is certainly a result that I think would warrant a title shot at the middleweight division, which has certainly been dead for the last probably 4 or 5 years. Him beating Liam Smith, being able to defeat a Chris Eubank, is certainly a more convincing result than, say, Denzel Bentley beating someone like Lennox Udofia, or being able to defeat a Mark Heffron, and certainly I'd suppose more convincing than getting iced in 3 rounds by Felix Cash. I did enjoy the card, man. I gotta say that, and I am looking forward to seeing what Liam Smith's future holds for him. But yeah, interesting result, fun fight, and great knockout. Congratulations to Liam Smith. Gotta say.